Story 1. Dolly Parton. I am from her hometown, and one year she gave the graduating class $500. It was a trial to see if it improved graduation rates. We had a ceremony where Dolly presented us with the check. Now I wear glasses, and the photographer asked me to tilt my chin up. I knew it was to reduce glare, but Dolly must have thought it hurt my feelings because she started talking about my beautiful chin and how it would look lovely in the picture. Class act all the way. Story 2. I worked at Heathrow for several years and met quite a few celebrities. The nicest was Paul McCartney, such a lovely and down-to-earth person. The worst were pretty much every D-grade reality television star. I actually had someone say, "Do you know who I am?" In all honesty, since I am Australian and it was an English footballer's girlfriend, the answer was, "No, should I?" Story 3. Super friendly. He was out jogging and stopped into a museum I worked at. We chatted for a few minutes and he went through the museum. On his way out, he mentioned that he had reserved 2 VIP passes for me to the evening's sold-out Wilco show. I hadn't asked for a thing, just told him I loved his music. Story 4. I came across Martin Sheen sitting on a milk crate in an alley outside an old Toronto hotel where he was filming. "Hey, how are you doing?" "All right, how about you?" "Fine, thanks." He was just a regular guy sitting on a milk crate. I was standing on a street corner with a friend and a couple of strangers when Ronald Reagan came by in a car that slowed down. He lowered the window and enthusiastically greeted us. We naturally returned the gesture. I remember wondering why he bothered for a few strangers on a sidewalk. Story 5. I've had a number of celebrity encounters, but the best one started with a short 30-minute interview with Robert Duvall for a documentary I was shooting. We set up in his horse barn in Virginia. We were over and done in a half hour, but while we were breaking set, he hung out and cracked jokes with us. He must have liked us because he invited us back to his house for coffee. For the next 3 hours, we talked about everything from barbecue to college football to Stonewall Jackson's Shenandoah Valley campaign. Thank God I'm a Civil War geek. We kept waiting for the social clues that it was time to go, but he just kept asking us questions. Finally, we had a long drive back, but he insisted on a tour of his study. He let me hold his Oscar, saying "Don't drop it," and a framed letter from Marlon Brando on how his performance in Apocalypse Now propelled him into the first rank of American actors. He followed us into the driveway and just kept talking. Finally, reluctantly, we pulled out. As we waved goodbye, the sound guy said, "You know, if there had been a football game on, I get the feeling he would have ordered pizzas and invited us to stay. Just the nicest guy. Really." Story 6. I've been lucky to not have a bad interaction with celebrities. I worked on Dirty Jobs with Mike Rowe back in the day. He would come in every few months for meetings and stuff. I would show him footage of the segments, and he was always cordial and professional. The last time I saw him was about a month after my wife and I found out she was pregnant. I saw him pass my edit bay on his way to a producer's office, then double back and come in to congratulate me on the pregnancy. I'm not sure who told him about it, but I always thought it was cool that he came in, talked to me, and seemed genuinely happy for me. I met Matthew McConaughey and Kate Hudson while they were promoting their movie at a Super Bowl back in 2003. Both were extremely friendly. I've said it before, Matthew McConaughey is charismatic as could be. Story 7. I work at an airport, so I see a lot of celebrities. Nicest: Jeff Goldblum, Christoph Waltz, Post Malone, Eddie Redmayne. Rudest: Abby Lee Miller from Dance Moms. Story 8. When I was working at Disney World back in 2006, I met Steven Tyler and Johnny Depp. Both were very friendly. Johnny Depp was there dressed as Jack Sparrow, presumably doing a publicity event, and was just being Jack. Steven Tyler was there on vacation and incognito. I didn't even recognize him until he paid for his purchase with a credit card, and I saw the name and asked. We had a short conversation, and I told him I liked his music, and he thanked me. It was a very down-to-earth conversation. This past summer, I met Elijah Wood at my job. It was extremely surprising that he'd even be in my town, so I didn't think at all that it was him. I said to him, "Has anybody told you you look like Elijah Wood?" He laughed and said, "Yeah, I've been told something like that." Then I said, "Wow, you even sound like him." So he laughed and said, Well, I am him, and shook my hand. That was pretty cool. This is a secondhand story, but a few years back, a friend of mine was working at a hotel when Jerry Seinfeld was in town for a show. I went to the show, and apparently he was one of the worst guests he had ever dealt with. Just incredibly rude and entitled. Story 9. Worked at a concert venue. Nicest. Michael J. Fox. Super nice, he was waiting by my door and we chatted for about 10 minutes. Worst. Jerry Seinfeld. Impatient and dismissive. Sounded like he didn't want to be here. Story 10. I met Dax Shepard, and he instantly made fun of my appearance. I met John Cho from Harold and Kumar on January 1st many years ago when he came in to buy a yoga mat. He was kind enough to take a photo. Story 11. Mr. T was really friendly. Al Pacino not so much. Pat Sajak was unpleasant. Leonardo DiCaprio made me want to knock his face through the back of his head. George Clinton made me feel like family. Story 12. Nicest. Travis Barker. It was a meet and greet with Plus 44. Both he and Mark were super chill. You were only supposed to get one thing signed by each member of the band, but I asked Travis if he would also sign my Famous Stars and Straps hat. The security team came over and tried to usher me along, but he stopped them and said of course he would. He's normally a pretty expressionless guy, but he was smiling the whole time after I asked that. Afterward, he spent more time just talking with us even though the line was super long. If I remember correctly, his famous brand hadn't really gotten huge yet. He seemed very stoked and appreciative I had bought a hat. Again, this was Plus 44, but everyone from Blink is awesome. Story 13. I've met two international ones that people would know, Matt Bellamy from Muse and Pink. I met Bellamy near a show venue and talked for a couple of minutes. He was nice and humored some music nerd questions and was about as awkward and all over the place as you would expect if you have seen interviews with him. An alien with no context would probably have been forgiven for thinking he was the one in a weird situation meeting somebody of note the way he was carrying on. Pink was a worse meeting, but I honestly do not blame her because it was in the middle of the night, early morning after a festival performance earlier in the night, and she and some of her people were just looking to get food in a restaurant tent a relative of mine ran. She said hi to people and all that, and she was not rude, just tired and on a mission, but I think uncharitable people could have read her as unfriendly. Story 14. My brother delivered a BMW to Huey Lewis. He invited him inside to have lunch. There were other musicians there, probably the News. My brother said he was the coolest, most unassuming guy you would ever meet. They all had lunch and then he gave a tour of his home studio. Story 15. I have met a few musicians one-on-one before. Herbie Hancock was incredibly kind and was a great conversationalist. I was seated next to him at a benefit dinner, very cool guy. Victor Wooten is another one. Just loves music and his passion for it is infectious. Great to see such positive energy there. Yellow Wolf, I wouldn't say he was rude, just kind of indifferent. It was one of those meet and greet things before a show of his. He looked pretty tired from the tour, so I don't hold it against him or anything. I get that stuff like that can be a slog. Story 16. Cannot nominate a rude one, but met Olivia Newton-John. She was my wife's hero and was charming, gracious, and truly gorgeous. She gave us a good amount of her time when she could have chosen not to. Also met Jason Donovan and Kylie Minogue when they were just actors on Neighbors in the late 1980s, and they were both lovely. We apologized for bothering them, and the girl with Jason said, "No, do not worry about it. He loves it." Story 17. Mel Brooks was delightful and treated you like family. Patti LaBelle was very sweet and personal. Dennis Quaid was fun and a nice guy. None of them acted like celebrities. Story 18. I was also a chef at a restaurant in Austin, and Sandra Bullock wanted to compliment me. She was with Jesse James, her husband. She was so lovely and engaging, and the ex was too busy checking me out. She was right next to him. Keanu Reeves also went, and he was so sweet and greeted me and the owners before it closed down. Story 19. I'll always take any opportunity to criticize Val Kilmer. My friends went to one of his speaking tours back in around 2009. This was a Q&A format, so people were there to ask him questions that he would answer. My friend was first up, and before he could ask a question, Val interrupted him and tried to get my friend to use a little Japanese girl's voice while asking his question. My friend didn't comply, but Val just kept insisting. There was a lot of back and forth because Val wouldn't stop, and my friend wouldn't give in to this behavior, so Val just asked him to sit down. I should also add that my friend was about 19 at the time, and Val was bullying a teenager while he himself was around 50. The entire time, Val looked like he didn't want to be there. Someone even asked if he liked the Doors' music before he took the role. Val's response? I didn't like their music at all. I just took that role for the money. I've heard him talk about playing gym in the past, and it sounded like a passion project, so I guess he just felt like being unpleasant on this day. I get sometimes not wanting to interact with fans, but this was his speaking tour. What was he expecting? I know he goes on Reddit a lot, so I hope he sees this. Hey Val, you're unpleasant. Story 20. I met the band Hailstorm after a concert in 2010, and they were all super nice, especially LZZY, Joe, and RJ. LZZY is such a sweetheart. I also met Kurt Angle. Got a picture with him in the ring after a house show. Super nice guy. Story 21. I met Keanu Reeves once at a coffee shop, and he was the absolute nicest person ever. Super humble. Asked about my day, and even took the time to chat for a bit. He is exactly how you would hope he would be in real life. On the other hand, I met Justin Bieber at a meet and greet a few years ago, and he was incredibly dismissive and rude to fans. He barely acknowledged anyone and acted like he did not want to be there. Totally changed how I see him now. Story 22. Nicest drowning pool. Had not heard their music when I met them. A friend was a fan and took a photo with him and them. Coolest bunch of guys ever, and were just thrilled to be hanging out with fans. I became a fan shortly after because of the interaction I had with them and loved their music. Rest in peace, Dave. Have not met too many celebrities. Story 23. I used to work as a film extra, so I got to meet plenty of celebrities. I will not say who was the worst, but there was a clear winner on who was the best. George Takei. He was very laid back and friendly to everyone, regardless of whether you were a co-star or a lowly extra. I worked in over 100 productions, so the fact that he stood out to me was a very good thing. I met him again at an autograph signing years later, and he was genuinely amazed that he left such an impression years later. Just a very nice guy in general. Story 24. My cousin does behind-the-scenes work and said Kristen Stewart was very chill and nice. She mentioned her brother also does behind-the-scenes work on sets. She gave a really generous wrap present when they finished filming. Denzel Washington is also very generous with wrap gifts and polite. Coleman Domingo was super sweet, and everyone loves him. He wanted photos with everyone on set when they finished filming. He was also very warm, chatty, and kind. To be fair, my cousin said it is normal for actors to keep to themselves, so it does not really make them rude if they are not chatty. Rude is being demanding and not acknowledging people exist, for example, not saying excuse me. In my experience, Lady Gaga is nice and tips very well. She used to be a regular at the restaurant I worked at while I was in graduate school. Pierce Brosnan and his wife also tipped well and were nice. Martin Sheen was also good. Leonardo DiCaprio was a lousy tipper and mumbled, but was not rude. Jimmy Iovine, I did not even know who he was, but a coworker did, and he is a big music producer and label head, is rude to waitstaff. Story 25. My favorite interaction was with Heidi, the cross-eyed possum at Leipzig Zoo. What a superstar. I cried when I met her. Too cute for words. Rest in peace, little princess. Story 26. I've met quite a few people at conventions, and you get a feel pretty quickly for what they are like when they are dealing with their fans. Some that stood out for me were George Takei and Nichelle Nichols. They were clearly good friends and delightful with their fans. I had my toddler with me, and they adored him. Sylvester McCoy was another who was an absolute delight. He did bird songs and hand tricks. I've also managed to have good conversations with Jason Momoa and Carl Urban. Not so nice was Will Wheaton, who clearly thought he was better than everyone there. Short queues. No interactions beyond the cursory. Story 27. Nicest. Willie Nelson. Years ago, when he was at the height of his popularity, a friend and I snuck backstage and introduced ourselves to him. He was genuinely happy to meet his fans. made a lot of eye contact, and showed interest in us. Rudest, Ted Kennedy. My mother and aunt were doing typical old lady tourist things in the Capitol. My aunt was gawking at the ceiling when Senator Kennedy came rushing through carrying a big stack of papers. He literally ran into my aunt and knocked her down. He didn't help her up, didn't apologize, didn't say a word. He just picked up his papers and hurried off. Story 28. Jim Kelly and Bruce Smith, back when I was a kid during the Jim Kelly Show era, were two of the nicest people I've ever met. Tom Savini, I won't say I met him, but he was at a Dragon Con I attended a while back. He had his little autograph table. I went up to him, started to thank him for all the movies he worked on that I loved. He just scowled and pointed to his autograph fee sign. He didn't say a word, not even a nod or smile. And honestly, there was no line. He was just sitting there alone. I understood why very quickly. Story 29, Charles Barkley. I know he gets some complaints about not always being nice, but he was wonderful when we met him. Sitting at the Philadelphia airport, my wife came up and said she physically ran into that guy who plays basketball. Apparently she walked out of the restroom with her head down and walked right into him. So I told her she needed to be a bit more specific. She said he's on the basketball show on television, doesn't play anymore, and it wasn't Shaquille O'Neal. So I looked around and saw Barkley. Oh, cool. As we're boarding the plane, I turn around and he's directly behind us on the jetway. Nobody is moving, so I turned around, said hello, and asked if he minded taking a picture with our 2-year-old daughter. He instantly said, sure, put his bags down, took off his hat, and scooped her up for a picture. He was great. We chatted a little bit and then boarded. As he got to his seat, he yelled out my daughter's name and said he hopes she has a great flight. Love that picture and how nice he was.